we're obviously going through just an unprecedented time, personally, as a country, as a world. And it's easy to lose sight of other important things like Bristol Bay in particular. And I thought that this might be a good way to start checking in on these fronts. I know we've all been doing, most of us have been doing a lot of this kind of stuff here recently, getting used to a whole new reality of life by Zoom. But basically, I think what we're going to do is go around the horn here. I'm going to just moderate and introduce our key speakers, and then we can ask some questions and kind of just do a check-in on where we are with Bristol Bay and where we're going to go moving forward here. So, Tyler, are you able to get in here and co-host and do the controls and all that kind of stuff?
If you have given me co-host abilities, then I can certainly help you out.
Okay. There you are, co-hosting. Boom. Just like that. So first off, I would like to introduce Dr. Carolannwoody, and a dear friend and character in The Breach that you all just got to see. I'm going to grab my notebook here one quick sec. And I got a couple of questions for each of you. Carol Ann, first of all, for those who don't know already, who are you and what do you do?
I am a fisheries biologist in Alaska, and I was a scientist with USGS, and then when Pebble came up, I left USGS and started my own company and focused pretty much on the Pebble issue for about 10 years. And then I recently went back to the National Park Service as regional fish biologist. So, but I still was working on Pebble there as a federal person. So it's been quite a Pebble haul, I will say.
Well, that's good. I have a question specifically about Pebble. Knowing that you were there, what did you observe while working on the ground in the Bristol Bay watershed, and how, in your estimation, by your observations, would a giant open pit copper mine fare there?
Well, it's a very wet area. It's very porous. I think they're going to have huge water issues and waste containment issues, but there are salmon everywhere up there. And one of the things, when I first started working on this in 2003, I asked Northern Dynasty if they were going to do salmon surveys up there. And they said, in those little streams, nah. And so after I left USGS, I was able to get grant money, and we basically documented hundreds of miles of streams, of salmon streams up there, and salmon spawning right next to where the mine pit is proposed. I mean, that whole region, there's salmon everywhere. And what I wish we could do this year is go and actually get salmon counts, because I don't know if the fishery is really going to be full on this year. So it might be a really good year to get good numbers, because basically the studies that they did there were flawed, and the estimates of how many fish are in those rivers that could be impacted are very flawed. So. Oh, I can't hear you. Say something. I think you're muted.
I am muted. Thanks, Carol Ann. I'm going to pass the torch here to Dave Montgomery, also in The Breach, fellow Seattleite friend, and working on all kinds of amazing things. But Dave, same thing. I'd like to just give you an opportunity, just give yourself a little intro. Who are you and what do you do?
Well, I'm Dave. I teach geomorphology at the University of Washington, and I get into all kinds of other trouble too. But a lot of it has to do with writing, and I came into the salmon issue after working in rivers in the Northwest for a little over a decade. I wrote a book called King of Fish about the history of salmon in different parts of the world, and sort of took the story up through modern Alaska. Didn't touch Pebble in the book because it wasn't as big an issue then, but it's certainly blown up since then. And I keep looking at it as sort of the zombie mine that refuses to die.
You know, in the book you wrote, which my copy is signed by you and is marked up, scratched up, tore up, dog-eared up. It's the tome that I used, you know, a ton of research in.
It sounds like you need another copy.
I do need another copy. I loan it out all the time, damn it. So what are the wild salmon 5 H's, and which H should we be paying attention to most right now?
Well, you know, the one that we've kind of ignored is the H that I tried to add, which is the H of history, of not repeating past mistakes. And if you look at the sort of really bullet synopsized history of salmon in different parts of the world, we'd sort of gradually chipped away at their habitat, blocked them from access to their streams, degraded their habitat to the point where we wonder, oh, you know, did New England really used to have salmon as abundant as the Pacific Northwest? When I first brought that up at a meeting at the governor's office in Washington talking about salmon recovery plans, there was sort of this, really, who knew kind of a thing. And, you know, if we don't actually pay attention to how we have altered nature in the past, we are much more likely to make the same kind of mistakes as we have made in the past. And, you know, the one I liken to the Pebble issue would be the salmon streams of the Sierra Nevada during the gold rush. They were incredibly rich, incredibly productive. And they were basically written off in exchange for a short-term rush to grab what turned out to be gold that we don't even know where it went anymore.
Thanks, man. Yeah, it's striking, and you know, being people from the lower 48, especially here in the Northwest and Northern California, you know, it's not that long ago we can remember runs that were vibrant and you know, at least much more vibrant than they are now. I wanted to switch over to, I don't think Robin is here. Robin, are you here with a different little code name there somewhere? If you're not, I think I don't see it here on the list. So I think I might switch up and pivot over to Lindsay, Lindsay Layland, joining us from Dillingham. Lindsay, same sort of deal here. Who are you? What do you do? And then we'll get into a little bit more.
What a treat it was to watch the breach again. I haven't seen it in a couple of days. No, it's been a while, but I'm Lindsay and I live in Dillingham. I'm a commercial fisherman. I work for, most of you probably know, I work for an organization called United Tribes of Bristol Bay, headquartered here in Dillingham, representing over 80% of the population, 15 tribal governments, kind of working to protect the traditional way of life out here in Southwest Alaska, which of course, up until a couple weeks ago, was the biggest threat posed by Pebble, which it still is looking into the future. So we're trying to make sure that our efforts remain, you know, with respect to the current crisis, remain focused on the even bigger looming threat that we're seeing from the proposed development of Pebble. Which unfortunately is still moving full stream ahead in the permitting process, just because of, you know, the Army Corps' insistence that they're not going to take any measures to hit pause, even though our people can't meaningfully engage right now. So that's pretty concerning. But yeah, I live here and I work here, and I've been with this organization for 3.5 years now. And I work with a pretty awesome team of people. I'm thrilled and excited to be a part of Mark's team that's kind of working on this project and getting it out there. So thanks for letting me be privy to all of this, because it's really exciting to work with such a dedicated group. And thanks to all of you for the work that you're doing. So happy to answer any questions from on the ground here in Dillingham if folks have them. And I am in my office right now, as you can see, but don't worry, it's by my own choice and no one else is here. So definitely safe measures are being taken. But yeah, thanks again, Mark, and happy to field some questions if there are any, and if not, that's great too.
Cool. Thanks, Lindsay. We also have some other friends and commercial fishermen here, Catherine Carscallen, representing commercial fishermen from Bristol Bay, and Michael Jackson, representing Bristol Bay Regional Seafood Development Association, our primary partner and sponsor in the tour, the forthcoming tour, that may closely resemble what we're doing right now. We'll see, but one day at a time. Catherine, I know you're on the ground up there right now. How are people feeling about what we're dealing with right now with COVID-19 and the upcoming season? I know we've got a large expected return run again.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And it's good to see a lot of familiar faces on here. I am on the ground here in Dillingham, and so excuse my internet if it cuts out. I'm on my home internet, and it's been a little overpowered lately with everybody at home. But yeah, it's like Lindsay said, we're facing a couple of threats now at this point. I think by nature of our fishery, what makes it strong also exposes us right now. Facing just a large influx of people to our region to harvest this amazing resource. So on the ground right now, I think everyone's working really hard to come up with plans. Obviously, the safety of our communities is paramount, and with so many unknowns right now, we're just doing everything we can to get plans in place to make sure we aren't exposed by this influx of the fleet. And as far as the fish and the resource, we've had nothing but assurances from all the biologists that whatever comes out of this, our resource will remain strong. So that encourages me, and we're just taking it day by day at this point.
Thanks, Kat. MJ, do you want to chime in too from anything you're hearing on the ground with the fleet?
Yeah, thanks, Mark, and thanks for everyone for attending, and also thanks for every single person that's involved with this film project. You're all warriors, and you're all the voice for a region that doesn't have a voice. So thank you. I'm of the firm belief that we can't go forward with a fishery until we have a plan in place that protects the native population as well as the opportunity to harvest a resource. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge on a number of levels, but there's a bunch of big brains working on it, myself excluded, not in that category. But I work hard and I can lift heavy things. So I've been doing a lot of lifting lately. I think that most everybody that I know of is working towards a solution, and we'll see what that solution is.
Thanks, MJ. Two more shout outs, and then we'll open it up here for discussion. Meghan Barker represents Trout Unlimited, our other co-sponsor in the tour and longtime partners in this whole battle for bringing awareness to Bristol Bay. How are things shaping up in the sport fishing community, Meghan, in terms of your communication with folks on the ground?
Yeah, so I would just echo what Catherine said. I think a lot of our lodges and our guides and our outfitters are taking things day by day. A lot of folks are optimistic that they're going to be able to carry on and continue with another great season in Bristol Bay, showing people exactly why this place is so special and so deserving of protection from Pebble. But I think there's also so much of a dedication and a number one priority and commitment into keeping the people and the communities in Bristol Bay safe. And so I know folks are coming up with a number one plan, a number two plan, and are prepared to throw those to the side just depending on how this whole situation shapes out. But again, I think one of the strongest components of our fight against Pebble is the fact that we all come together and look out for each other's well-being, and I think that remains true even in this situation as well. So yeah, that's what I have to share.
Thanks, Megan. Awesome. And lastly, for now, want to introduce my friend and neighbor, Susan Lebetkin, who's another scientist, been working on current developments with regard to the current environmental impact statement. And Susan, just want to give you a shout out and introduce yourself as well.
Hey, Mark. It's good to see everybody else there. I am in Seattle. Mark, I met about 1.5 years ago when we got locked in a gym together for about 6 hours. We talked for all of it, which was really, really good. We were talking about the wild and then another film project that I'm involved in. So you'll see that in the near term. But I got my PhD at UW, so I love seeing Mark's films because I was in the QUIRM program, which is quantitative research, and a lot of that was folks in fisheries departments that I was hearing from a lot. So I'm a statistician. That's not anything I ever meant to grow up to be, but it turns out that's what I am. Don't hate me because of it. I just crunch numbers for fun. And so after I met Mark and started talking to him about the process that the draft environmental impact statement is in, I got involved and started reading chunks of it. And the piece that I looked at was one that was mentioned in the breach, which is the transportation corridor. It's certainly changed from how it was described in the breach, but it turns out moving 16 million gallons of diesel up and down using marine barges and then trucks and then ferries and then more trucks and moving ore concentrate out, the same way is not without consequences. So even thinking about, all of the things that can go wrong if the tailing ponds fail and there are big breaches, there's also just all the crap that'll happen with business as usual that we can't ignore. And at least from what I saw and wrote about, there's all of that got completely glossed over in the draft environmental impact statement.
That's a pretty good summary. Yeah, there's a lot going on. There's a lot we can drill down on, but I promised Dave that we would try to keep this reasonable here. So I'm going to open it up to some questions or comments you guys might have right now. We'll try to do this in an orderly fashion. If you've got something you're thinking of, go ahead and type it right into the chat. The chat function is just down in your lower bar if you want to do that, or just raise your hand up and we'll call on you that way. There you go, Cindy.
Unmute myself. There I go. Hey, it's Sid in Portland. I live half a mile from Johnson Creek, and I have Ray Troll hanging on my wall. And we're working on our positive button to add to the campaign. So anyway, my question is for the statistician, probably. What is your feeling about how things are moving through DC at this time? If you have to monitor other paperwork that they're doing or things that are happening, is there any way to see if that department is actually like rolling along? That's my question. So I'll try and answer a little bit about it. I am a statistician and not an environmental attorney. And so when I try and talk about how the NEPA process works, I apologize if anybody there, please, if you know NEPA better than I do, please speak up. So my understanding on the way that the process works, and NEPA, although it sounds like EPA, is the National Environmental Policy Act, not Protection Act. And that is a huge, huge difference. And so when a project is put forward like this one, the science is mostly paid for by the project proponent. The DEIS that is written is rated by the agency that writes it, taking in comments from everybody, and then they have to write a final EIS after they've done the draft EIS or environmental impact statement. So the agency writes their own draft, a bunch of comments comes through, they rewrite their own draft, wait for more comments, and then grade their own draft and decide on what alternative they're going to choose. Based on NEPA, they don't have to make the environmentally sound decision. They have to make a considered and informed decision. And so the task for people who are trying to show that this is bad science is to say, you haven't made an informed decision and you have followed the policy. And so it winds up being all administrative procedural act stuff that goes forward. All of that, as far as I know, is just along with every work. So the expectation is that the final EIS is going to come out sometime over the summer, and that 30 days after that, at a minimum, theoretically it could get extended, is you get a record of decision of the agency chooses which alternative they want to approve. No action is on this. Those don't get chosen very often. I don't know if that answers it.
Thanks, Susan. We've got a question for Carol Ann here. Carol Ann, did you see that in the chat there?
No, here, let me go.
Can you dive a little deeper on your mention of numbers not being accurate, how this season we might possibly be able to get a more accurate count?
So the conclusion of no impact to the fishery, part of that is based on helicopter counts of 5 different species of salmon. And then they divided it by area. That this was done over a decade ago when runs were much lower. And somehow, without, I'm not going to go into the statistics, but you've got to see the statistics, girlfriend. You would just choke. Anyway, they didn't really do the statistics on it, appropriate statistics. And they came up with this, like, fish per kilometer. And they've broken the rivers up, both the Coquetolie system and Telerik system up. But the numbers are so, I mean, they're bad. The information is not scientifically defensible, and it's very troubling that they have used this science, what they are calling science, to basically come to the conclusion of no impact to the fish or the fisheries. This year, and this depends on how the Bristol Bay fishery goes, relative to the virus, but I think it's going to be challenging if we don't get through sort of our pandemic in a timely manner so that they can get the fish when they come in. I think that there might be, I think there's an opportunity there to actually, run weirs and get total counts on those systems on the Coquetolie system and also on Telerik. I think that could be done. And maybe it won't happen this year, but even if we don't do it this year, maybe next year, because it's still going to take them a while. Because if something does happen to those rivers, if that mine goes in and something does happen, then, at least be able to show what they need to compensate people for, even though, as most of us feel, it's difficult to compensate for polluted water and lost fish. So. You're muted still.
Thank you, Caroline. Fantastic, Dave. Before you have to take off, what other observations are you making right now in terms of, I don't know, again, coming back to that historical precedent, like we've kind of heard this before, and eventually we'll all get a chance to watch the breach together here, or the wild, but that this time it'll be different. And these guys that want to put the mine in are making a pretty big claim that they've got technology sufficient to contain any problems. And again, from that historical perspective, can you comment on that?
That's the closest analog that I can sort of offer for that's the Octetti mine down in New Guinea, which was put in that was in late 80s, early 90s, if I'm recalling right. It was a big copper gold mine in the headwaters of the Fly River. And the mining company basically said, look, we're going to have all, the best modern environmental safeguards. We're going to minimize risk. We're going to operate it in a way that will be environmentally responsible. And what happened? They built a giant earthen tailings dam in a steep area subject to earthquakes and a lot of rain. And basically the tailings dam failed, and it copper poisoned the entire Fly River. This was the thing that could not possibly happen because of all the environmental safeguards that were being built into it. And what happened is the mining company basically walked away and stuck the government of New Guinea with the bill. So, I mean, I've actually been quite shocked at how little that example has been used in the whole Pebble mine. I keep bringing it up, but it's, there weren't salmon in the tropics, obviously. And the context is a little different, but here again, we have, I think, the key vulnerability of what little of an actual proposed design I think has been made public is a massive earthen tailings dam in a seismically active, really wet area. I don't think there's an engineering analysis around that could basically guarantee that will not actually fail at some point in the future, especially if you're talking about something that needs to be maintained over the long run and after the lifespan of the actual mine. In Octetti, it failed during peak production. So, I mean, it failed much faster than even the most cynical view of what the mining company was thinking might offer. But it's a pretty sobering lesson in what can actually go wrong in terms of the best laid engineering plans.
Dave, Kat had a question for you.
Oh, it's more, I just wanted to catch you in case you're going to go. It's more of a comment. I just wanted to thank you for your book and fangirl a little bit. I guess being, I never knew I'd get this chance, but just growing up in a place where salmon are so abundant and catching them my whole life, I think your book really introduced me to what we've done around the world in this whole concept that really it's not necessarily that Bristol Bay's special. It's just that we haven't made the same mistakes as the rest of the world yet. And I think I read your book about 15 years ago or 10 years ago. I can't remember, but it just completely changed my view on everything. So thank you for that. I've always taken what we had a little for granted, and that opened my eyes.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad it was useful and interesting. It was a lot of fun to write. I'd been working on rivers in the Northwest for about a decade at that point. And I kind of knew going into it that if I wrote the book I wanted to write, given what I had learned, I would lose all my funding to work on salmon rivers. And that's exactly what happened. But so now I'm working on regenerative agriculture and looking at the history of that. It's kind of parallel, actually. When you look at natural resource management and the short-term decisions we keep making over and over and just giving the bill to our descendants. I mean, it's the same. It's just, you change the context, you change the players, you change the details of the story, but it's the same script.
It is. Colles has a question for you, Dave.
Yes, Colles.
So yeah, Colles Stowell, One Fish Foundation. I actually went down to the premiere of The Breach in Boston with Catherine and Mark. I think that was 2016. Hey, Catherine. But yeah, so I have a question. The thing that really raised a flag for me was when the Corps of Engineers, was it in January? I don't remember. So much has happened since then. When they said that they were not going to take into account the worst case scenario, which would be a dam tailings failure. So basically, to me, that sends up the flag saying, we're going to ignore the science. So,
or at least the risk.
Right.
You're ignoring the risk. Yeah.
And so, it's the next question is, how do we reframe the narrative? How do we bring that back in? Because to me, that's blatant, and I wrote about it, and it's blatant. But how do we elevate that discussion somehow?
That's a really good question. I mean, the one way to look at it would be, well, what actually is the worst case scenario? And, you can keep stepping back from even, one step back from the worst case is pretty bad. And so sort of how you define it, but it certainly sounds like by making that decision before they know what it might be, or what without wrestling with what the actual risk might be, they basically cooked the answer into the equation, right? I mean, I think that the way to go at that is with risk. And we're seeing basically that play out with COVID-19 right now, right? I mean, the actual risk to any one of us is fairly low, but if you have enough people getting infected with it, people will die. And so we're all socially, we're all isolating. I'm sitting outside in our yard. I know I'm not directly answering your question, but it seems appalling to me that you would basically punt on making the decision about a risk without sort of weighing what that risk is. And risk has two components. One's the probability of occurrence, and the other is the consequence of occurrence. And what they're basically saying is that we don't care if the worst case scenario is destruction of the fishery, that's just off the table. That's not a scientific call. It's a policy call. And so, I mean, you have to fight that on a political level.
And timing is everything this year, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, when is the EIS due anyway? Is it the end of June? Is that correct? The final EIS, is it June? I thought I saw something like that.
It was in June.
If I'm wrong.
Yeah, they're expecting it to be in the next 2 to 3 months. On the EIS time, or the permitting process timeline on the Army Corps website says, I believe right now it says mid 2020 or around June 2020.
we're potentially anticipating something at the end of June. Who knows if it'll be a month later than that, but sometime maybe June, July, with then the record of decision, the ROD, coming out no earlier than a month after the final EIS is released.
And also, just to add on to that, the Army Corps has said that they will not be extending or pausing the permitting review process during COVID-19, which I know other groups have written letters calling for a pause for that permitting process. But so far, no change.
Yeah, as Sal just added that, essentially every local Bristol Bay organization and commercial fishermen and sport fishermen have been pleading with the Army Corps to relax their timeline, extend it, do something to give us some breathing room, because we're all focused 100% on making sure our communities and fishery are safe. And they're just, you know, I would imagine they could be helping us with this and building field hospitals or something like that, but instead they're just sticking to their timeline, and it's really frustrating. And we've made asks of them and Alaska senators as well to step in and just pause this thing while we all deal with what's going on. Everybody's, you know, I understand that we can't stop government, but there were already so many flaws in this EIS to begin with, and we haven't had the opportunity to address many of those flaws because of what's going on with this virus.
Yeah, and you know, the $64,000 question for us when we are able to really ramp up the tour, and you know, the form that it ends up taking is then what to do with the momentum of folks that are coming out to see the movie, and you know, hopefully building and growing in number. And we're taking a populist approach to the, you know, the immediacy of that, in that we want to show it with numbers and with faces, and people on the ground, you know, to the next president of the United States and to the key legislators involved, that this is a terrible idea. And, you know, the thing that we've been really fighting, I think, you know, everybody that's been in this for a long time will agree that it's really the silence. I mean, most folks, the further you go from the Northwest in Alaska, have never heard of Bristol Bay, much less the proposed Pebble Mine. So it's really incumbent on all of us. I mean, if you know, if this is the first time you've watched The Breach, or the 30th or 3000th, perhaps in somebody's case here, that you know, and you see something in there, by all means share it with your friends and neighbors across the country, and get folks fired up for the wild. We need to make a lot of noise in a very short amount of time. And I see there's another couple questions coming in right here. So yep. Let's see, Martin, why don't you just chime right in?
Hi, we were just wondering if hopefully, or whatever, there's a new administration in the White House come the fall, if that's going to have, or do you think it'll have much of an impact on this, or are you finding inertia even with the previous Democratic administration under Obama? Is it really just a question of the small size of the population there, and you're just not getting the traction with Lisa Murkowski and the other politicians? Is that the issue, or is it really just pure, they're just not listening?
I'll give you a quick perspective and then open it up to any one of the panel members here. You know, in my perspective, it is about people just not knowing about it. And we know that politicians do move once people make noise, especially when people make noise in mass. And that has just not happened in this case. I mean, there are ardent supporters who have been giving their lives and their hearts and their souls to this thing. But as far as a national movement and people really raising their voices in mass, that hasn't happened to this point yet. So I really feel like whatever the administration, that as a populist movement, folks really have to show here and now, that this is something they care about. And the way we're trying to frame it is as saving what you love in the form of what is, essentially the world's last fully intact wild salmon run. But I'd love to hear from maybe Carolann or Lindsay what your thoughts are on that.
Go ahead, Lindsay.
Sure. Well, I mean, as you can see, I kind of addressed the question briefly there, but I mean, to answer your question tentatively, it's possible that a new administration could change the direction of the EPA, just in terms of like, are they pro-development at all costs, or are they pro-environmental protection? It kind of depends on who's at the top there, but the biggest challenge that we're facing is like, that's not even a concern right now, because our timeline is running out with the final EIS being issued. Any activity that's going to happen, if our current court case doesn't move forward the way that we want it to, anything that's going to happen is going to happen before a new administration takes place. So that's the biggest concern right now. That's not to say that if, a new president takes over and that's someone who is, a little more in favor of reinforcing these environmental protections, that they wouldn't, put forward the 404C again, but they can't right now, just based on the litigation that we're in and the activities that's going on. So I don't know, Kat or Carolyn or anyone else can answer that too, but it's just like that, as much as we'd love to see another Obama in the White House because of what his administration did with 404C, like there are more pressing concerns in the next 4 months before we can even think about, lobbying or not lobbying, talking to that administration.
Anyone else want to chime in on that? In terms of shifting?
I'll just add one quick thing, just because I'm not sure that it's been said yet, but I think it's important to remember the reason this timeline is really Pebble's timeline. It's the company's goal, and it's 100% aimed at getting investors, if you remember, and I think it's covered in the breach, right? I'm sorry, it's been a couple of years since I've seen it. I didn't watch the whole thing just now, but as you remember, they've lost every major mining company has taken a look at this project, and even the ones who invested millions and millions and millions of dollars have walked away from it. And so Pebble's singular goal here with this permit is to gain investors, and they this proposal that they forwarded is going to look like in the end. It's and no one with half a clue would believe it. So they're really just, this is their foot in the door. But that's really what we're facing too, is as soon as they get another investor, we're facing a whole different animal here. Right now they're a half broke company. But if they get this permit and attract a new investor, we're going to have a bigger battle on our hands.
I think that's an interesting point is just made, though, that they are desperate, which makes them, they're going to do whatever they can. And so that's why they're probably pouring a lot of lobbying money in right now in order to ensure that there's the least amount of resistance going into the final EIS as possible, which is why they're not taking into account the worst case scenario with the dam failure. So whatever we can do to lift the curtain on that, that to me seems to be like a critical tactical thing that we can do.
Well, another important point here, I think, and there's a lot of people representing this here on this meeting. Bristol Bay is a fully regenerative food source that is serving up the best protein you can possibly dream up. And I mean, we're seeing what kind of a fragile edge we're on right now in terms of distribution and where we get our food. And Dave's working on, has been for years now, on regenerative agriculture. I mean, that topic isn't really brought up in that way. In mainstream circles in the lower 48, and it's something that we intend to do and really lead with on the tour of the wild. I want to be mindful of time. You guys have been incredibly generous, especially our panel members. We're going to do this again next week, and we're going to announce the next bit of entertainment we're going to have for next week tomorrow. But I just wanted to go around the horn here and get any last questions from anybody out there. Food security, what practical actions can we do to make noise? Yep. What resources can I share that demonstrate that the mine is not a good idea? Well, that is, let's see, I tell you what, we have a Spark page, and I'm going to send you a link to it right now, which kind of gives you an overview of what's going on, and you can share with folks. We've got these incredible partners that are on this call right now that would be happy to share. There we go. Check that out. And like our friends at TU and our friends at UTBB, United Tribes of Bristol Bay, and Commercial Fishermen for Bristol Bay would be more than happy to share resources with you. But this link that I just posted up here for you is a good place to start with kind of illustrating the big picture of what's at stake here. So with that, I'd just like to open it up here with our panel members at last time. Dave, do you got any parting words here tonight?
Boy, no. I thought that years ago that the Pebble issue had kind of turned a corner, and it's incredibly frustrating to see it just sort of keep zombie marching on. But the first job I had out of college, well, actually, sort of the one going back into grad school, was writing environmental impact statements. There's usually a lot of things you can challenge and fight in them because they're often not very good.
Kat, Michael, MJ?
Oh, MJ, you're muted.
Not anymore. Watch out. I just want to applaud everyone for your passion, because you're here because you care. This is an unprecedented time. We're in uncharted waters. We're all looking for some chart to get us out into the other side. And for you all to care enough to show up tonight and still have the passion beyond your day-to-day existence should be applauded. Thank you.
Thanks. Megan?
The last thing I'll just say, one of the duties of my job is working on the Save Bristol Bay Facebook and Instagram page. And I think a lot of people have been asking us, or at least internally, like, what is an appropriate thing to share right now? Because a lot of people are really concerned with the ongoing health crisis, but we also know that we have to be as strong as ever for Bristol Bay. And the sweet spot that we found with that is just continue to share some of the incredible footage that comes from people like Mark and his team, and your Bristol Bay photos or Bristol Bay photos and videos that you can take from our sites. Just continuing to share what an incredible place this is, while also giving people a little bit of a respite from the news is a great option right now. So if you're not super comfortable sharing the petition or asking people to make calls to members of Congress or whatnot, sharing photos and videos is a really great option for right now, and we appreciate it.
Perfect. Carolyn?
Well, just based on the reviews I've done on this last round, on the final draft that I saw, I think it's very error-ridden and flawed, and in some cases outright wrong, which I think, when it all push comes to shove later on, I think that that should give people some hope, because yeah, it's extremely flawed. And yeah, and I think that the whole basis for their conclusions of no impact are also wrong and flawed. So I think it'll take some time, but I I'm hopeful on that end. So.
Yeah, I've seen a number of projects where a flawed analysis for that can lead to a long battle to basically continue fighting over it. And what I've not quite totally understood in a lot of those is that why don't they just make the political call that they're writing something off and choosing something, making a choice, rather than basically trying to rely on data and analyses and things that are flawed and that could actually be challenged on a technical basis. I don't necessarily understand their strategy other than one of expedience, but it gives you all an option for in terms of how to look forward, even if you lose this next round of the fight, line the scientific ducks up so that you can actually try and take out the validity of the ESA that they put out, if it is as flawed as I'm sure that Caroline is correct about.
All right, folks, we got our work to do. It's cut out for us here. Please join in some more. You know, if you like doing this, I love seeing all your faces. This is fantastic. Vink and I have been, like you, at home here for the most part, and it's trying not to murder each other, she says. And, you know, success so far. But we're going to make this a weekly thing, and we'll announce the next one tomorrow. But would love to, you know, to connect this way until we can see each other again in person. So thank you all for coming tonight, and till next time.
Yes, and please share your ideas of, you know, as we're going to be in this, well, obviously the Pebble fight for a while, and looks like this COVID fight for a little while too. So whatever this virtual space is, whatever you guys' ideas are for making this most impactful or getting most people behind it, like, send it our way. This is all our creation.
Absolutely. So the connect@thewildfilm.com is kind of our all-purpose email address. Tyler and I both get that. So does Michelle. And so we, you know, we're monitoring that. If you have ideas, please send them along, and take good care of each other. We'll see you again soon. Good night.
Good night. Good night.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Nice to see everybody.
Yes.
Hi, Caroline.